Welcome back to my nightmare. I think I've found a more comfortable way of reading this, but I could be wrong. The problem with the last video is that my hands started to get tired holding the book, which is a problem when you're reading from the book and you need to hold it. Anyway, what we're doing today is we're going to be reading chapters 3 and 4 from my book Carmilla 86. Cheesy peas. I mess it up every time I film this intro. So I'm going to try and read it all in one go. There's not going to be any editing. And the vibes for the video are that you are sitting at my friend's kitchen table. In this daydream we have, it'll be my kitchen table. But we're actually at my friend's house because I'm house sitting. But you're sitting at the kitchen table with me and I am just reading you a story. Because of that, because of where we are and the vibes we're going for, you may hear a dog barking or several dogs. You may hear lawnmowers. I can't control the outside world. All I can do is try to entertain you with the inside world. So make sure you have a beverage. I've got coffee and water here and a snack. Go get your snack. And we will get started. I do just want to say, if you need content warnings, please go watch the previous video. Start at chapter 1 because I read all of the content warnings at the beginning of that. And if there's anything that I feel like is too spicy to read on camera, I will probably cut that out. So if you would like to get the entire spice scene, please consider going and buying my book. If you get the deluxe edition, which is what I'm reading from, you will get Hatchet Grannies as well, because that's the bonus story that you get in the book. Meanwhile, you can also just buy Hatchet Grannies by itself as an ebook, or go watch me read that because I read that all in one sitting because it's a short story. So with that being said, I've filmed this 17 times and I've messed it up every time. As long as my voice holds out, we will be continuing with chapter 3 and 4 of Carmilla 86 by Avery Morstan. Chapter 3, Laura, March 14th, 1986. I saw her again tonight. If my handwriting is illegible, it's because I'm shaking. I feel cold. But I know if I don't get this down, I'll regret it. It was everything. Honestly, I'd given up on seeing her. I guess I figured once her car was fixed, she and her mother would be on the road again, continuing their trek across the countries. Probably stopping off at random roadsides to bond over seeing the world's biggest ball of yarn or greatest slice of pizza. A part of me was jealous of that. I don't remember my mother all that clearly anymore. I was so young when she passed. I remember illnesses, shaking hands, and the beauty of fragile circles under her eyes. Witnessing that level of exhaustion on someone's face was both a privilege and a curse. I wish I could remember her in the sunshine. Maybe Mom out on our land helping Dad with the gardens or something. I wish I could remember her strong and vibrant. I think of all the road trips we could have had if she were still here. That is a very big side note. I am so shaken from tonight. I'm not going to be able to focus on anything important. I looked for her all over town. I felt like maybe if she hadn't left, I can't say I'd have asked her out or something, but it didn't stop me from stalking the bright aisles of our supermarket, wondering if she'd be there, looking at cereal amidst the neon lighting and the old country songs. Maybe we'd share a laugh at the one new wave cashier who stuck out like a sore thumb against the abundance of flannel and blue denim. Maybe I'd ask her to go to La Fontaine's with me for a cup of coffee. Alex would eat her up with a spoon. He loves femme fatale types, and she'd be right up his alley. Sometimes in the bright afternoon sun, I'd be driving along the road on some errand or another, hoping she'd emerge from the woods like a goddess of the forest. It was uncomfortable, especially when I'd get back to the main house and Dad would be there with Bertha's cousin, Luke, who was helping Dad with the parts of the spring prep that I was just too womanly for. Okay, maybe they didn't say that outright, but it was the implication that riled me up a bit. See? No focus. Alex and Donnie were worried about me spending too much time with my dad, so they insisted that we were going to go out. Dad brought up my hair again. I admit I was trying to sneak out so he wouldn't see me. I knew he wouldn't like the outfit I was wearing. It feels silly at my age to be sneaking out of the house, but I just wasn't ready for the confrontation. I know he still sees me as his little girl, and he says I'll always be his little girl. But instead of comforting, it feels more and more like a curse. He wouldn't approve of the thoughts his little girl was having towards that beautiful stranger. He would definitely not approve of the type of club Alex had in mind for tonight. Anyway, he was in the kitchen getting a beer when I came through, and he made fun of how spiky my short cut was. Like, it was a tiny bit of moose, Dad. Don't have a cow. He also said my outfit was too slinky for a sleepover at Donnie's. I told him we were going to see Alex in a play, which was a tiny bit of a lie. Alex does drag sometimes, and even though he wasn't performing tonight, it helped to have that kernel of truth in what I told my dad. I'm a terrible liar, so I need the facts to help me sometimes. I didn't like the way Dad was staring at me, appraising me. I felt like whatever he decided on, it had a heavy dose of a disappointment. His disappointment is chafing. I often stop to think about the girls I knew in high school, the ones I knew from church or after-school clubs, even the girls I knew in college. They're probably all married by now. Maybe they even have kids. Meanwhile, I'm in the same bedroom I'd grown up in, trying to sneak out from under Dad's overprotective, watchful eyes. It feels like if I make one wrong move, he's just going to ground me. I'd stay grounded just because he said so. It's a frustrating place to exist. Donnie whistled at me when I got to her place, and I blushed. The jeans I wore were too tight for every day, but they hugged my rear, and the friction of the worn denim against my skin was a nice feeling. The night air was cool through my pink camisole. It was trimmed in lace and so silky it was probably actually meant to be under something, but I thought the color suited me. I was wearing my mother's denim jacket to prevent me from the chill. A part of me felt like it would be the right thing to object to going out tonight. It feels like I should be Daddy's good little girl and stay home. I don't know how to knit, but I feel like I should be doing that. Some lost hobby that good girls did. I hate it. I hate this war inside myself between what I want and what I know is right. The bar was very far away from where we live, and Alex drove us, which is awful because Alex cannot fucking drive. He drives fast. It feels like I'm moving and not moving at the same time. Like I'm a bullet traveling through the barrel of a gun. The bar also took forever to get to because it's so far away. We listened to the radio, and Donnie and Alex argued about God knows what. I stopped listening eventually. Sometimes I think it's a little sad that Alex is gay because the two of them would make a really good couple. Donnie continued her complaints about being a black doctor in a small town, which are entirely valid complaints. I just wish there was something I could do for her. Alex complained about the same thing, only instead of his skin color, it was the stupid guys that used to call him a fag in high school and shove him into lockers coming into his bakery to taste wedding cakes with their ex-prom squad girlfriends. They still call him a fag, it's just under their breath this time. Not that their girlfriends aren't thinking it. They are. But they also know La Fontaine's has the best cake in like 100 miles, so they cannot afford to piss Alex off. I don't complain. You have your dad, though, so you can relate, right? Donnie asked at one point. I frowned at her, unable to understand what she meant. Alex shifted the conversation quickly away to complain about how no one writes good love songs anymore. He turned up the radio, and I turned my thoughts off. I mean, she's not wrong, but like, what am I supposed to do about it? I don't want to lose the only parent I have just so I can, hole up in shady bar corners and closets and kiss beautiful, mysterious women? The windows were down, and the night air was cool and damp. It rushed through my short hair, chilling the tips of my ears, and made me shiver. I tried not to think about anything other than that until we got to the bar. If you didn't want frizzy curls, you shouldn't have gotten the perm in the first place, Donnie was telling Alex when I tuned back into their conversation. We were pulling into a parking lot that was dark and had weeds growing up through the cracks in the pavement. It looked someplace like serial killers went when they wanted to compare notes with other serial killers. Here we are, Alex's smile was beaming. This is the gay bar you go crazy for? Donnie asked. She was frowning at him. Her face matched how I was feeling. Look, honey, when you live out as far out of civilization as we do, you take what you can get, Alex told her. She shrugged. At least the parking lot was crowded, so we knew there were a lot of people inside. Everything got easier when I had a drink in my hand. I could lean against the bar and look like I belonged there while Donnie and Alex flailed around on the dance floor. Again, I felt like they could have been a couple. In another life, they would have fit, maybe. I let myself imagine it for a while. A gorgeous girl with dreadlocks started to approach Donnie, and for an instant, I was reminded of the night that Bertha died. The woman in front of her, the back of the woman's head as Bertha followed her up the stairs. What a face to make at a club, a sultry voice purred in my ear. It startled me and made me jump. I almost spilled my drink. Somehow, Carmilla's laugh was the only thing in the room I could hear. I didn't think I'd ever see you again, and yet here you are. I'm surprised to find you in a place like this. What sort of place do you think I should be in? I wondered. I took a sip of my cocktail, a Long Island iced tea that was too strong. It made my limbs feel like Jell-O. Or was that her? Her eyes flicked from my eyes to my mouth and back up to my eyes, a cheeky smile on her lips. Somewhere befitting of a princess. Somewhere pink and pastel and very much like my childhood bedroom, I'm assuming. A princess. What makes you think I'm a princess? She quirked an eyebrow at me. You don't think so? The drink must have fried my brains because I don't know what I was thinking. I swallowed. Maybe I'm a knight in shining armor. Are you here to rescue a fair maiden, then? She asked, and the tilt of her chin was too perfect. Or are you looking for a witch? Heat pooled in my stomach. I put my drink down on the bar. Consider me enchanted, then. You want to dance, oh shining knight? Carmilla said. She winked at me, and she took my hand without waiting for an answer. With the music surrounding us, I just let go. In the flashes of electric light and moments of near darkness, I focused more on what I could feel. Her small hands were strong, gripping my hips as she pulled us together. Her hair was soft and wild. I know because I ran my fingers through it before I cupped her chin. How she got that volume without it being hard from hairspray was a miracle. She was so close to me. That same lilac smell from before was surrounding us as the club seemed to fade away. I think you're right. I think we've done this dance before. I pulled back a little so I could look into her eyes, which were soft and fond. She remembered me. She remembered that night. Want to go somewhere private? We could talk. Talking is the last thing I'm thinking about with you, she said. But she'd stopped dancing and she was pulling me across the floor towards the nearest bathroom. The next thing I knew, we were alone and the music was Far Away, soundtrack to our kisses. She had me against the sink, which was digging into the back of my thighs. I ached for her. I hate to say that, but I did. I wanted nothing more than for her to touch me. Carmilla, I whispered when I finally came up for breath. My hands were sunk into the soft, yielding flesh of her ass. Again, I hadn't even noticed what she was wearing, but the pockets that my hands had slid into all on their own suggested jeans. She nipped at the warm place on my throat just under my ear. God, I just want to bite you until you bleed, she said, biting again with teeth that felt too sharp. No blood. I don't play like that, I told her. But I tilted my head to the side. But you can bite all you want. It was a bad idea. A dangerous game to hook up with a stranger in the bathroom. The same stranger I opened my eyes as she started to work her way down my throat, and I let out a scream. Over Carmilla's shoulder was my old roommate, watching us with fascinated eyes. Bertha, I gasped. Carmilla turned and smiled. Look, Bertie, I found us a snack. The cabin, present day. Frankie brought them another round of drinks. Hugo had sat back away from Carmilla as she finished adding her point of view to what he already knew. He'd practically memorized Laura's diary, so none of this was a surprise to him. He looked at Frankie as she sat their new glasses down. A plain pint for Hugo and a wine glass for Carmilla. A Merlot, nothing added, unlike the deep, thick burgundy liquid that waited for him in his own cup. Frankie nodded and winked at him before clearing their empties and going back to the bar. He watched, and he wondered if she really knew all that much about younger vampires. The younger the vampire, the stronger the thirst, and the more out of control they could become without refreshing themselves. He wondered if her attentiveness meant that she was keeping him sane for this conversation. Frankie couldn't possibly know how long he'd waited for this, how eager he was. For the first time, he noticed a book on the bar. It was sitting on the corner closest to him with a handwritten sign propped up against the glass in front of it. For Kyle, don't touch it. Frankie paused at the book as she went behind the bar and began angrily muttering something to herself. Even with his heightened hearing, he couldn't quite make out what she was saying. Finally, she threw her hands up in the air and turned one of the pages of the book, exclaiming, "Fine!" before getting back to work. Hugo, startled, looked to Carmilla for answers. She shrugged. Sometimes Kyle gets bored, Carmilla said simply. As she swirled the wine in her glass around, she raised an eyebrow at him. So, there is a Kyle. Somewhere, Hugo prompted. Carmilla's answering smile was sly. I don't see anyone named Kyle. Do you? Hugo was beginning to feel like he was dealing with a sphinx. Carmilla only answered his questions with more riddles or questions of her own, and all of it seemed barbed. Her words shot accusations buffered under a poisonous softness that he did not enjoy. I don't see anyone named Kyle, but... He frowned. But what? I'm guessing you're trying to tell me not everything is as it seems. Carmilla shrugged. That seems more like a you problem than a me problem. Okay, leaving that one aside, Hugo started, determined to forget this whole Kyle business and move forward with his interrogation. So, you killed Laura's best friend and what, brought her along as you stalked Laura as well? Were you hoping for some polyamorous little family or what? If I were hoping for that, I wouldn't be looking for your approval or opinion on it. I am giving you the facts as they happened, which you already know if you're reading her writing, Carmilla pointed out. She tilted her head to the side, and Hugo had the distinct impression that he was nothing more than a bug under a microscope to her. She was playing with him, and he was worried about what would happen when she became bored. Seems a bit tacky, he replied. Hugo picked up his glass and took a large gulp. Then he took a second, deeper drink. Oh, that's really nice. Frankie is good at what she does. She's had an awfully long time to learn how, after all. Carmilla said, looking at the pink-haired bartender with a slightly fond expression. She glanced back at Hugo. It's never as nice as the real thing, you understand, but it does good enough in a pinch. Maybe Hugo hadn't been undead long enough to discern a difference between the taste of fake blood and the real thing. He grimaced. It's not real. It tastes real. You will develop a more sensitive palate over time, Carmilla told him in a gentle, soothing tone of voice. Just like your new circadian rhythms. As soon as you've grown used to being awake at nighttime, you'll be able to wake earlier and see the sun more often. You can go out in the sun, Hugo sputtered. To his utter embarrassment, blood dripped from his mouth onto his light-colored shirt. He groaned and searched for a napkin. Of course there were none. It was a fucking bar. Shit, I'm like a messy toddler. Does that make me your mommy? Carmilla asked sweetly, holding out a handkerchief that she'd produced seemingly out of thin air. He glowered at her, but he took the hanky. You're welcome, sweet boy. Ew, he said. As he unsuccessfully swatted at the stain, he took a closer look at the linen in hand. There was an L and a C embroidered on the corner with a pattern he thought might be forget-me-nots. He glanced up at Carmilla, who was looking entirely too smug. She shrugged again. Since you like mementos, maybe you should just hang on to that, she suggested sweetly, going so far as to bat her eyes at him. It's a myth that the sun burns us, Hugo. Over time, your strength will grow, and you'll be able to do all sorts of amazing things. It's a matter of patience, which you have, to be so still interested in this case. Hugo nodded. So, Bertha. Carmilla winced. A sweet girl. And I was starving that night. There's not much more to tell. I'm just kind of lost on the timeline, he admitted. He fingered the soft embroidery running over the L again and again. He huffed. According to Laura's account in the diary, you tried to have her, too, the same night that you kept Bertha. And I saw the crime scene photos from Bertha's murder. That was a mess. What? Why did you need them both? There are many types of hunger, Carmilla told him, with a dark smile that held a predatory sharpness. He used every bit of self-control not to flinch away from her. He even managed an eye roll, which he was quite proud of. I doubt you've ever hungered for anything, he muttered under his breath. Carmilla's eyes grew darker, and he swore the air in the bar became thicker, somehow more misty than it had been before. Did they have a fog machine in here or something? You are a disease on beautiful women everywhere, Carmilla said, her voice so low he had trouble hearing it. She was vibrating with anger. You sicken me. You fixate on a woman just because she was thin and blonde and she had the misfortune to die young and pretty. If her life were a film, you would cast my part with an actor who had no breasts, no ass, and probably no talent because all you see is my body. You're disgusted with me. You can't believe someone like this angelic facade, this paper doll that you believe yourself in love with, could want anyone as monstrous as me, and it has nothing to do with my blood and everything to do with my body. Shallow men disgust me. She's not a conquest, she's a corpse. I'm trying to solve a case, Hugo objected. But was he? To my Laura, my figure was perfection, and you will never have her the way that I had her. Carmilla spat. Frankie appeared at the table again, and she reached out to put a hand on Carmilla's shoulders. Hey, quick second. You're kind of freaking Kyle out, which I, definitely don't care about, but maybe just cool it down a bit. Also, there's a call for you at the bar, she said. Carmilla blinked, and the air seemed to clear once more. She breathed out and nodded at Frankie. Her edges were softer when she looked at Frankie's face. She still glared when she looked at Hugo. Forgive me. I'll only be a moment, she said. But the cool tone in her voice suggested she wasn't actually asking anyone for forgiveness. Hugo hoped that one of the special talents he learned as he aged would be that kind of confidence. Not that he'd ever admit it out loud. He also wondered who the fuck used a landline anymore as he watched Carmilla, her full rear end filling out her black jeans perfectly, answer the call at the bar. Her entire posture changed. She became boneless as she leaned, and the smile on her lips was genuine, and it lingered as she slid back into the booth once the call had ended. "Where were we?" she asked. "Was it good news?" he asked, flicking his eyes over to the phone and then back to Carmilla. She smiled. "The best," she answered, and that was all she was going to say about that. Water break, kids. 1 second. Chapter 4. Laura, March 15th, 1986. Well, Bertha totally killed someone last night, which meant a lot of my questions went unanswered. Everything after the bathroom went downhill in such a hurry that my brain is still scrambled. I remember Carmilla wistfully touching my face before her and Bertha hauled ass out of the back entrance of the club. I remember Alex and Donnie pulling me towards the car, screaming about how none of us could afford to be caught when the police arrived. And I remembered that the club seemed awfully smoky, but I guess it's not a crime to have a cigarette in a bar every now and then. On the news today, it seemed all of the security footage was too smoked out to be useful. A man is still dead, and my old roommate is still alive, apparently. Dad was not thrilled that I went out with my friends last night. We already covered that, but what followed this morning was one of our worst fights ever. I can't say I've fought like this with my father a lot, but if I have, it says, I can't say that I fought with my father a lot, but if I have, it was never like this. He didn't shout, but he did imply some really nasty stuff with his tone. It was threatening and the most uncomfortable I've ever been in his presence. I kind of wish he'd have let me clean up first, though. Dad was waiting for me when I came through the door at 6 a.m., exhausted because I had no sleep. My makeup was smeared, my hair was stuck up all over from the 1,000 times I ran my fingers through it while I was explaining to Donnie just how frightening the entire night was. She didn't believe me, I think, but she tried her best. Dad was on the sofa, like a lion about ready to pounce on an antelope, and I never even saw it was coming. With quietly simmering rage, he told me how disappointed he was in me. What else is new? "While you're in my house, I don't care what age you are, you're going to respect my rules," Dad said with his coffee in hand. "You're going to be in at reasonable time so I can make sure the doors are locked and we're all safe. You're not in the city anymore, Laura, and out here, there's no one to help you if you get stuck." I thought of Carmilla there. In theory, any number of things could have happened to her while she was stuck on the side of the road, if she was ever even in any real danger. But I had come by. I had been the night in a dented pickup truck. Maybe my dad was wrong? I tried to tell him that's why I stayed the night at Donnie's, so he could be sure I was okay. He didn't like that either. "Laura, honey, sit down," Dad said, and he patted the sofa next to him. I collapsed into the armchair that faced him instead. I felt like my bones were turning into that soft gelatin whip casserole the church ladies would bring to Easter supper. The green one with the bits of fruit mixed in. Too soft and in some parts too crunchy to be good. I didn't like this. I felt like I was in trouble, and that seemed absurd. "It's one thing to be friends with Alex and Donnie when you were young," Dad said gently, as gently as I'm sure he could stomach. "Hell, I even felt better knowing you were out with a queer instead of some boy that was just going to take advantage of you." I guess that meant he didn't know that Donnie also fell into the queer category. "But you're an adult now. This isn't some story like Peter Pan where you all can just run around being teens forever. It's time you start thinking about settling down," Dad said. He took a drink from his coffee while I processed what I'm sure he thought was a revelation. "I know I'm getting older, but after what's happened, I'm not so sure about the settling down parts." Dad continued. Peridon and Alex have been great friends to you, and I'm not saying you can't be nice to them or go to the bakery sometimes, Dad said. But there are other people out there, and I just think you need to open your mind to meeting some of them. I wouldn't want you to get hurt. What do you mean by that? I asked. Dad shrugged. I just mean that sometimes people can be guilty by association. You wouldn't want to be the centers of the ladies' talk, would you? You know how those old girls prattle on after service on Sunday, Dad said. I didn't miss the edge of a threat in his words. He was completely serious. I swallowed. They do go on, I replied. I felt kind of numb. I started to think that maybe I needed to escape from this place. I will admit that I've been talking to Luke a bit, Dad said, and that only made the headache that was forming worse. Luke, Bertha's cousin, the man who helped my dad around on the farm. I'd always had a healthy distrust of Luke, especially after I seemingly randomly was paired with his cousin at college for a dorm mate. At first, it had even prevented Bertha and I from becoming friends because I felt like home was still somehow watching me, trying to make sure I was being good. Now, Luke and his friends are going to go out tonight, and I think you'd have a good time with them if you go along. The carnival's in town, and I know you used to love those funnel cakes. Luke, I said. My heart thudded heavily in my chest. You want me to go out with your farmhand, that Luke. Look, Laura, you two went to school together, and I just think it might be nice for a change for you to hang out with some normal people. You can do that for me, can't you, Pumpkin? Dad said, and we stared at each other for a long time. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell him to go to hell, to stop asking these things of me, but his expression told me it wasn't actually a request. This was some antiquated dating ritual where he was setting me up with the guy he wants me to marry. He wants me on the farm, having kids, making breakfast in the morning before I go out to feed the chickens. He wants the life of church Sundays and the summers at the park complaining to the other wives about how my husband's truck has been outside of so-and-so's house a lot lately, and I just hope he finishes fixing her dishwasher soon. I do not want that. The nightlife I had was somehow more honest than any of what my dad wanted. The bathroom rendezvous, the night neon lights with a velvety darkness, a girl who smelled like lilacs and hairspray. I wanted no children and too many books and apartments with quiet times for when the world became too much. I didn't want what Dad wanted. Yes, sir, I said meekly, and I hated myself for it. Good girl, he replied, and I was dismissed. I fled to my room where I passed out for a long, long sleep. I dreamed of banshees. A long time ago, when I was very little, there was this movie that my mom watched with me. It came on TV one afternoon, and it's one of the few memories I have of her. There were these little people, leprechauns, and I remember they were tricky. In one scene, they tricked the main guy into thinking his daughter had died, and the banshee had come to take her away. It was this dark, neon-shadowed creature that screamed and screamed. In my dream, Carmilla and I were back in that dim club bathroom, darker in my memory than in life, and Bertha was watching us. Until someone started screaming. I don't know who was screaming, but as the wails grew louder and louder, I watched as Carmilla's shape began to change. She melted into nothing but a shadowy creature with glowing eyes that stared unblinking as her fingers clawed at my jeans. I tried to look at Bertha, but she was changing as well. Where was the screaming coming from? Their mouths were closed. That's when Carmilla flipped me so that I could look in the mirror. With her draped over my back, I saw my reflection. I was screaming. As the screams continued, my own eyes began to glow. Carmilla purred. That's right, Laura. Good girl, she said. I awoke to the sound of my dad banging on my bedroom door to let me know that Luke was waiting for me. I hadn't even showered from the night before. With a sigh, I pulled myself out of my bed and let him know that it would be a few minutes. I shouted it through the door, actually, because I didn't need to see his disappointed eyes again. I took the fastest shower possible and did what I hoped would be some sweet, girly makeup. At least I was going to get a funnel cake out of this disaster of an idea. I threw on an old sundress and vaguely wondered if this was how Alex felt when he performed on drag nights, like it was a costume. Dad told me how pretty I was, even though his eyes lingered on my hair, and Luke helped me into his truck. I could have met him there. I knew how to drive. This was feeling less like going out with Luke and his friends and more just going out on a date with Luke. But that's okay, because Carmilla was waiting for me. It was actually kind of funny, although I'm sure Luke didn't think so. I told him I didn't think a haunted house sounded like a fun time, but he insisted we go in. His buddies and their dates had already abandoned us for the Ferris wheel, but I'd told him no. I feigned a sudden fear of heights, which I'm sure he didn't believe because we grew up together and I was always climbing trees, but he said okay and pulled me towards the haunted house. It was a makeout request, I'm sure. He was going to wait until something startled me and I would leap into his arms where we would kiss while he held down the killer clown at bay with one arm. I'm sure that's what was happening in his little Luke brain. Meanwhile, I was still in a daze as I considered the night before. Bertha was alive. After all this time? And what about Carmilla? They knew each other. Had Carmilla been behind the awful way I found Bertha's not corpse? The haunted house was creepy in its impermanence. With dusk quickly turning into a warm spring evening, the rusty metal facade was starting to fade into the sky, leaving only neon outlines of ghouls and vampires on the chipped front. It reminded me of my nightmare. Its hinges creaked as we ascended the folding stairs, which felt too fragile to be safe, and held up our bright green tickets to the man at the door. Up close, the peeling paint was more obvious. There was some kind of metaphor about the wear and tear of being pulled from town to town, folded up into a compact shape and rolled out when other people wanted to use you. But I was too tired from the night before to really think of one. I was too busy trying to avoid Luke's hand, which had settled on my lower back and then started scooting south towards my rear end. "Hey, Laura, it's okay," he said, giving me a pinch. "I'll protect you." I snorted. After what I'd seen the night before, I wondered if anyone was capable of protecting me. A hand that didn't belong to Luke snatched out and pulled me tight against the wall, and I found myself coated in something warm and sticky. I looked down to see blood dripping over the pale floral print of my dress, and I started to scream. I looked back at Luke, and his face twisted in horror. "What the fuck?" he yelled. He looked around us. A croaking voice answered him. "Bertha's coming for you, Cousin Luke." He screamed, and he took off down the hall, leaving me alone in the dark with my assailant. "Stop struggling," Carmilla's voice laughed. I pulled away, or maybe I was released, and I spun to look at her. Well, try to look at her. It was dark, and her hair blended into the shadows, so I could only see the limited light reflecting off her cheek. I heard Luke scream again in the distance. "Oh my God," I said. I looked down at myself, my heart thudding so hard that the fabric of my dress shook. I brought my hand up to wipe at the sticky substance on my chest. "Is this blood?" "This isn't blood." "It's not blood," Carmilla replied. She grinned, and her teeth caught the black light and glowed of bright purple. Did she have fangs? "We wouldn't waste perfectly good blood on that. It's corn syrup." "What would you waste perfectly good blood for?" I asked her. But she just shook her head. "Let's get you out of here. And maybe get you a towel," she said. I blushed. "I didn't drive. Luke picked me up," I said. She shrugged. "I know where his car is. Let's go," Carmilla said. She reached out to take my hand. Against my better judgment, I let her. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a thing I wouldn't let Carmilla do to me. Watching Carmilla hotwire Luke's truck to run shouldn't have been as sexy as it was, but I enjoyed it. Her tight black jeans nipped in that plush waist I dreamed about, her thighs on full display as she settled in the cab of his truck. I was definitely not thinking about what it would be like to have my head crushed by those gorgeous thighs. Nope, not at all. When the motor was running, I climbed inside, and we pulled out of the field and onto the main road. I was still uncomfortably sticky. Sometimes I feel like I'm never going to escape. Like, I love my dad and all, but I feel like this place has a hold on me that I can't break. Even going to college wasn't far enough away. It always pulls me back here, I complained. She shot me a questioning glance. Like, I know she was expecting me to ask her about Bertha, but I had been holding this in all night. With every touch of Luke's hand, with every brush of his body against mine as he tried to win me prizes or coax me onto rides, the echo of "this is what Dad wants" had been running through my head like a new wave song. After a long moment, Carmilla reached over and brushed my hair back from my forehead. Then her hand drifted down, and I inhaled sharply when the backs of her fingers lingered against my cheek. If someone offered you a way out, would you take it? Truly. I didn't know what to say about that. Yes, except I guess I wish I could find it within me to leave, to get out on my own. She pursed her lips. You're right. Nothing ever comes for free. If someone offered you a way to leave, it would cost you something. If you found it yourself, you'd have your freedom. I shrugged. My dad would be sad if I left. I'm all he has. It's complicated. And the only thing holding on to you, and he's the only thing holding on to you. What happens if you stay? The question sounded like she was genuinely wondering. There was no pressure, just curiosity. You'll marry someone like that man you were with. There's nothing wrong with that. You'll have beautiful children and a home. You'll be cared for. It feels like a cage, I said. Or like the display cakes in Alex's Bakery, like a beautiful thing behind a glass with no substance. I felt that way too, a long time ago, she said softly. It's not a bad way to be. La Fontaine's probably sells 1 million wedding cakes because it's what people want. But you can't go on living what other people want. You need to know what you want. Is it bonkers that my brain immediately supplied the word you? I feel like it is. But I didn't say it out loud. I just nodded. What did I want? I wanted to throw myself at her like a rabid dog and feast on her flesh. I wanted to kiss her and also to strangle her for making me feel even more confused than I already had been. The church ladies knew what I wanted. Dad knew what I wanted. But they also knew that I was too proud, too willing to be dutiful to go after what I wanted. I could hear the visceral, heavy clink of the metal sliding against more metal as the prison door closed, locking me, barring me from my future. What do you want? I asked her. She grinned. You, she replied simply. My answer thrown in my face. I'm not a dyke, I said quietly. But we both knew that was a lie. She smiled and she glanced over at me. Laura, I will love no one and nothing else unless it is you, she whispered, whatever you are. Quick water break. The cabin, present day. No, Kyle, you cannot go poltergeist your girlfriend, Frankie was shouting into thin air, which ripped Hugo out of the close bubble that had formed around Carmilla and himself. Jesus, move on already, pal. Frankie noticed Hugo staring from across the room and flipped him off. Hugo flinched. Carmilla laughed, and he hated her a little bit for it. You're not really telling me enough about Luke, I think. I noticed that Laura did that too in her diary. He's brushed over but not really explained. Hugo tapped the diary where it lay on the wooden table between them. He was a victim of this case too. What was his life like? What made things turn out for him the way that they did? Carmilla appraised him with downturned lips. Hugo did the same. He could see the appeal she'd held for Laura, maybe, if he squinted. Anyone in a leather jacket or all black was probably cool, right? So of course Laura, an innocent farm girl that she probably was, really had gone head over heels when this supernatural lesbian had showed up spouting outdated poetry. Carmilla raised a single brow when she caught him lingering on her ample bust. It's not Luke's story, Carmilla finally said. Oh, come on. He was a man who did a lot of things for which an appropriate court held him accountable, Carmilla said, cutting him off. She let her tongue reach out and flick the bottom of one sharp tooth. It made her look like she was sneering at him, and maybe she was. It might not be the way a mortal judicial system works, but I think it's much fairer. To talk about that man takes away from Laura's story, don't you think? It centers her focus, the focus she chose for herself in her diary, on him instead of on her own discovery of her true nature. She was more upset about leaving her father, figuring out her sexuality, and finding me again, that she didn't even regard him as important. And yet you are so desperate to find a man to project yourself onto that you're choosing him. Poor wronged Luke. Evil, mean Carmilla. What a tired old story. She shook her head, looking tired. You're missing the point. Which was the apparently satisfying electric sex the two of you had? That doesn't give me the details I need to solve this, Hugo growled through clenched teeth. He didn't like feeling small and made fun of. Lucas Williams was Bertha's cousin. Laura's father had arranged for Laura to room with Bertha at school in an attempt to keep her under his watch. Bertha ended up dead, only not actually. And you said that your hunger is what killed her. I feel like I'm missing something. Carmilla nodded. You are missing something. I suppose I haven't been entirely honest with you. What do you mean? Carmilla sighed, and she looked back towards the bar where Frankie was still arguing with an unseen guest. When she met Hugo's eyes again, she seemed resigned. You are aware that this thirst is ever present. It never ebbs. It never ends. We can delay it. We can retain our sanity with blood, but this is what we are. We desire consumption. The ultimate capitalists in a morbid way. Our only existence is to drink and consume. Who taught you how to say fuck capitalism? Hugo tried to tease, but her smile held no humor. I taught myself. If you're going to live for a long time, you need to commit to being a lifetime learner. Otherwise, you might find yourself unable to breathe, Carmilla said. That party was not the first time I'd met Bertha. It was a step in a process needed to help her achieve her own strength. She was avenging herself for crimes that had been committed against her, and I helped. But you're not after Bertha's story. You're asking about Laura. Even though they intersect at times, they are different. How are they different? Carmilla rolled her eyes. Then she took a sip of her wine. She really was nursing her beverage, Hugo noticed. She let out a large, tired sigh and tried again. How much do you know about how we're created? Very little, Hugo admitted. He shrugged. I was bitten while chasing down a lead, and I've had to figure out stuff for myself, thanks internet. There's two ways to become a vampire. There is the bite, the struggle. Bertha needed that. She needed to fight to take on this burden. My mother and I assisted her. Carmilla looked at a spot just over his shoulder as she concentrated on the memory. My mother is more special. I like to think of her like a queen bee in that she was born to be what she is. She created herself. I've only seen it done a handful of times. It's interesting. Something wars inside the person, and when the passion wins, like Hyde killing Jekyll, they are born again, newer and stronger. I noticed that you haven't mentioned how you were made. Or when Laura found out about you, Hugo said. He went to take a drink from his cup but found it empty. He motioned to Frankie to make him another, and she rolled her eyes at him. You had to have told her at some point, and that night in the truck maybe. My Laura was smart. A clever girl. It was a short conversation, Carmilla replied. Does that mean she figured it out before then, or has she already knew when you told her? Hugo prompted. Carmilla huffed and rolled her eyes again. She picked up her own glass and drained the remaining wine before twirling the stem in her fingers. He noticed how her black nails stood out against the clear glass. What does it matter? Why does it matter when she found out what I am? You're a monster by definition, Hugo pointed out. He waited until Frankie had dropped the next round before leaning forward. He lowered his voice. I get it. I mean, I'm like you now. But if you really cared for her, shouldn't you have explained it all to her? It seemed unnecessary at the time, Carmilla said with a shrug. Hugo's frown deepened. To have the conversation? No, to tell you about it. Carmilla's smile was brittle. She was thinking something about him, something he wasn't going to understand, judging by the expression on his face. You've already discerned that she must have known. You've read what she wrote about it. Why bother repeating myself? Hugo shifted uncomfortably. Aren't you sorry for what happened to her? Carmilla regarded him with a long stare, and then the fragile smirk was replaced by a genuinely smug smile. He had missed something, he was sure of it. It's easier to apologize in retrospect, is it not? When others are pained and you are faced with the consequences of your actions, it's easier to say you're sorry then. Are you truly sorry? Would you not have held back if you were going to be sorry later? Or would you forge on and pray for forgiveness? What must happen will happen, whether you are sorry or not. It is easier to apologize in retrospect, Hugo repeated flatly. His eyes narrowed. What kind of greeting card affirmation is that? Carmilla licked her lips, chasing the wine that lingered on them. When I was created, I was not sorry. I was like Bertha. Despite my wealth, there were no resources for me. My money could be taken at any time by a man. I knew if I waited, there would come a time when I could be myself. Stop chasing the scullery maids and really fall in love. I did my research, I found my mother, and I plotted the perfect choice. Much like the one I gave Bertha, actually. I broke so many hearts, but I did what was best for myself. Carmilla looked over at Frankie, who had gone back to wiping a glass, and winked. Then she glanced back at Hugo. Should I feel sorry? I made myself safe. I gave myself power and control over my own life. Should I feel sorry for what happened to Laura, if that's a choice that she made? Hugo didn't like that. Most of these questions made his head absolutely ache and made his ego feel like a piece of Swiss cheese. He didn't feel like being lectured on the patriarchy by some feminist bullshit vampire. He huffed. I would hope that you would be a little bit regretful. Carmilla shrugged. I don't see why I should be. All right, guys, it's 2 chapters. I guess I should say y'all. It's a little more inclusive. Gosh, those 2 were long chapters. Oh, no, that's a long video. Hopefully it uploads. Anyway, if you like this video, please consider liking, commenting, subscribing, or you could go watch other videos I've made. There's a whole bunch of them. Actually, just do that. It sounds more fun. Just go watch some videos that I made. Anyway, go outside, get a walk, get a snack that is not a person. Maybe it is a person. I don't know. I don't judge you. Take a nap. Take care of yourself. I will see you next time. But first, I am going to go eat some dinner and then see about uploading these videos. Bye.